seem to hear the Polly calling me. I seem to hear the surf at Waikiki. And from Pacific Heights I seem to see the lights of a city that is very dear to me. I seem to see the waving sugar cane. The cocoa palms are nodding in the rain. In fancy I am led back to dear old Diamond Head. Honolulu, I am coming back again. I seem to hear the Polly calling me. I seem to hear the surf at Waikiki. And from Pacific Heights I seem to see the lights of a city that is very dear to me. I seem to see.
The Budget and Finance Committee for the County of Maui shall come to order. This is our regular meeting of 19 September 2017. Present this morning we have for the committee Ms. Cravello. Good morning, Mr. Atai.
Good morning, Chair.
Ms. Sugimura.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Ms. Cochran.
Aloha, Chair.
And Ms. King.
Good morning.
We excuse Mr. Carroll and Mr. White today. Mr. Guzman is in attendance.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, members, we have some items to go through this morning that the chair wants started before we go back into a budget cycle. So we'll take it up as we. But prior to that, we shall proceed with the opportunity of public testimony. By this committee's rules, we provide 3 minutes and 3 minutes only per item of anything we agendize. If you represent an entity, or state that for the committee's information, state your name. We will assist you with your time, and when the red light blinks, it is not meaning keep talking. It means stop talking. You address your comments to the chair. Before we take testimony, the chair will make one informational comment that would be on BF 42, tax classifications for transient accommodations. Let us be clear, what we have posted today is discussion on commercial properties for consideration under the proposal, not commercial residential. Therefore, the chair will not allow any testimony on commercial residential. That is not on the agenda, and that is not part of the committee's discussion today. Okay? So I'm stating that up front before any testimony. Everybody will be given the same parameters, but no testimony on commercial residential will be allowed in today's meeting. Okay, we shall proceed with testimony. At this time, we have Mr. Tom Blackbird Rodriguez. Also, members, people in the gallery, turn off any noise-making devices, please, as a courtesy. Good. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm testifying on BF 45.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Tom Blackburn Rodriguez, testifying for Go Maui on BF 45. Go Maui is a nonprofit organization whose focus is on affordable housing, good-paying jobs, water, and agriculture. We can be found on the web at gomauiinc.org. Go Maui supports the intent of this measure to classify housing units not used for resident use at the highest and best use. But we have reservations about this measure as proposed, as it may impact the taxation of units that are currently being used as long-term rentals. This could result in the property owners raising rent on their tenants, or worse, that some of these long-term rentals may be converted to short-term rental use. The Real Property Tax Department reports that this measure would move 2,599 properties from the apartment classification to the hotel classification. But what has not been determined is how many of these 2,599 properties are currently being used as long-term rentals, providing housing to Maui County residents. The measure includes a procedure for creating a 10-year residential dedication, but it is unlikely that any property owner would jump through all the hoops required in this proposed procedure just to save his tenant on rent. Another option for consideration might be to create an exemption that any property owner could apply for annually after demonstrating that the unit will be used as a long-term rental use. For example, upon evidence of a lease of more than 180 days, the property owner might receive a tax exemption to be determined by the council. Go Maui supports the potential additional tax revenue that this measure would create and thanks Chair Hokama for his dedication to a fiscally sound Maui County, but would not wish to see the loss of any affordable rental housing. At this time, Go Maui respectfully requests further consideration of this measure until its full impact on local rental housing opportunities can be fully determined and codified. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Go Maui, and on a personal note, thank you for the decorum and civility of this meeting. Aloha.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, any questions for clarification on testimony provided? Hey, have you not? We thank you for your comments this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Would like to ask Mr. Lawrence Carnicelli, please, if he would come forward and share his testimony.
Good morning, Chair. Lawrence Carnicelli with the Realtors Association of Maui. I have two items I'm going to testify on. I'll start with, I'll start with BF 45 just to be able to jump off of where Mr. Blackburn Rodriguez was. And, we're kind of in the same, we're coming from the same spot where we understand the intent of it. However, the mechanisms with which we feel this goes through is really going to harm long-term tenants. And this really, for us, first and foremost, is an affordable rental bill. As Tom said, the dedicated long-term rental use provision that's in this measure, basically what it does is it says you have to register your lease with the Bureau of Conveyances. Then you have to petition the director to go into this dedicated use. Then you have to agree to a 10-year restriction on that use that is equivalent to a lien on your property for 10 years. And if it comes out of that within 10 years, it reverts all the way back retroactive. Well, basically, a landlord can do that, or they can just raise the rent. Or they can kick the tenant out and say, you know what, well, if we're going to be hotel, we're going to go ahead and do a short-term rental anyways. So, I like the intent of it. It's just the ease with which, it's kind of disincentivizing landlords from saying, hey, listen, you know what, I really want to look out for my tenant. So that's one of the things. The other part is we're calling this as a highest and best use, going from actual to highest and best use. However, in the director's communication to the committee, he gives three examples: the EL Parkside, the Harbor Lights, and the Kanapali'ali'i. And in each one of those, he actually cites actual use, trying to say that he's using highest and best. EL Parkside zoned industrial. He says, well, but most people do long-term rentals, or they live there, so we're going to do this. Well, that's actual use. Harbor Lights is zoned hotel. Well, nobody's doing short-term rentals, so well, that's actual use. Kanapali'ali'i, that's a hotel. Yes, tax them as a hotel. However, part of the complication in dealing with condos is condominiums. There can be one complex, the Whaler. It has long-term tenants. It has homeowners. It has vacation rentals, it has timeshare, and it has commercial, all within that same complex. So if we're going to say, okay, we're going to just tax everybody at hotel. The other thing, too, I know I'm short on time here, but there's 125 small businesses that will be affected. There's 125 units that will go from commercial to hotel. Island Surf across the street from the Cove in Kihei, all those bottom units, right? Those are all TMKs. That's all commercial. That's all going to go to hotel. So that's highest and best. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have another item.
So BF 42, which is moving STRHs from commercial to hotel. Basically, this is a measure that was vetted in 2014. It came before this body. It was passed unanimously to put STRHs in the commercial designation. They're not hotels. You know, it could be argued that, okay, they're not commercial, but they're not hotels. When we look at, okay, you know, we may not like STRHs, but it's the new way people travel. People don't pick up their phone and dial their travel agent and go stay in the Grand Wailea. Some people do. But Europeans have been traveling this way for decades. South Americans have been traveling this way for decades. It's the new economy. And it's just, you know, I get the argument that people say it's, you know, it's hurting affordable housing, but moratorium, prohibition of anything has never worked. You know, so we can embrace it and we can say, hey, listen, these are the people that are trying to do it legally. These are the folks that are jumping through all the hoops. These are the people that are, you know, trying to do it right. They're paying their taxes and they're trying to do it right. There's some members of this body that actually went before the state legislature 3 weeks ago and said, we can't raise TAT because it's going to harm the tourist industry. We can't increase taxes on the tourist industry. And yet, here's what we're doing now, is we're saying we want to raise taxes on the tourist industry. So that's another part of this. It's also consistent with the Maui County Code to leave them in commercial. Essentially, it's the same use as long-term. It's just a shorter stay. The impacts aren't what it is in a hotel. These folks don't have the same zoning rights. They can't build mansions. Or, you know, they can't build hotels, I mean. They can't have parties. They can't have weddings. They don't have slides and big water parks, and they don't have all that. They're just, you know, they're not hotels. And, you know, like I said, this was fully vetted, and it was also brought before the Real Property Appeals Board as well. And the Real Property Appeals Board actually agreed that these should be in commercial. And initially when this, also just one last point, is when this was passed in 2014, in the committee report, it actually says that to move these to hotel would be detrimental. And again, so, and then lastly, because I got 21 seconds, is let's go to enforcement. You know what, the county can create money by property taxes, fees, fines, and penalties. Let's go to the fines and penalties before we go to the taxes. Let's go to the stick and go, if we get people to say it's not, you know, we can't do illegals, we make it prohibitive, then we'll get people to do it right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments, Mr. Carnacelli. Any need for clarification, members? Okay, thank you very much. Tom Crowley, please.
Hello, Chair, committee members. I'm Tom Crowley, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Maui Vacation Rental Association first on BF 42. I did submit written testimony on this item and copied each of the council members directly on my testimony, and I hope that you got that and were able to review that. I believe that the meetings that were held in 2014 really did resolve this issue. As Lawrence pointed out, unanimously, this committee and the council voted to classify the permit holders of short-term rental home permits as commercial. And there were numerous reasons for that, and I'm not going to be able to get through it in 3 minutes of testimony, but there are 5 main reasons why this proposal is unfair and inconsistent. But the main reason that it's unfair and unreasonable to tax short-term rental permit holders at the hotel resort rate is that we are not giving them the same land use rights that are instilled with the zoning that would come from hotel. We're also not giving them the same land use rights that come with an apartment that's condominiumized. I want to give you an example. An example would be a half-acre lot on Keavakapu Beach. This is a specific example of someone who owns a short-term rental. The land on that half-acre lot is assessed at $8.7 million. He has one rental to split up the taxes of that land. Just down the street from him on Keavakapu Beach, there's another lot that's about the same size, assessed at $6.7 million. But there's a condo on that lot that there's 40 units. That $6.7 million is divided by the 40 units, and therefore the taxation burden for each of those people is far, far less. Now, if you think about it, those 40 units that can have as many as 6 people using each of them, that's 240 people visiting Maui using the services of Maui. The short-term rental guy down the street, he's permitted for 5 bedrooms. The maximum number of people that we allow him to have on his property by his permit is 10 people. So we have 10 people over here paying a taxation that's 25 times greater than the taxation of the 40 people at the condo. So in short, you know, that's the main reason. But the other reason really is this one of enforcement. We say to the guys, go get your permits. They go get their permits. They do the right thing. Then we reward them by increasing their taxes by 30%, or actually by 48% because they got their permit. The guy who doesn't get the permit continues to be able to operate, pay the lower taxes. Now, if we had everything under control with respect to the only guys making this use were people who had permits, well, then I would say, okay, well, we're paying for you to do that servicing for us, but we don't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you have another item, Mr.
I do.
Foley?
Regarding BF 45, and I did give you testimony about BF 45 at the first issue, the first meeting that you had about this. As has already been pointed out, I don't have an issue with taxing folks who have the right instilled in their property to do short-term rental. It comes when they buy the property. You can do short-term rental at the hotel rate. Now, and the guys who choose not to, but choose to use the property as their second home, I don't care. Tax them the same way. They had the right to use that property as a short-term rental. They chose not to use it as a short-term rental, but simply as a second home. Tax them the same way. There's still a fairness in that. Where this measure fails is, I know for a fact, many of those units that are allowed to be used for short-term rental, they have the right instilled in the zoning or in the grandfathering use that they have of their property. But they choose instead to make a long-term rental for someone. I am very concerned that when you increase that person's property tax by 48%, there is a good chance that either A, he's going to raise his tenant's rent by an equivalent amount, or B, he's going to say, you know, you're right. I have the ability to make short-term rental. I'm going to make short-term rental. And when we talk about short-term rental permits versus this issue dwarfs it. In short-term rental permits, we're talking about a maximum of 382 permits. In this one measure, you could be affecting 2,600 properties. Now, not all 2,600 of those are being used for long-term rental, I'm sure. But I'm sure more than 500 are. Maybe 1,000 are used for long-term rental right now. So be very careful what you do. I do think that this measure requires more consideration as to how many of those properties are being used as long-term rentals today. And I like the recommendation that Mr. Blackburn Rodriguez put forward, which would be, if you are going to change this, create an exemption for a property owner who would come forward and say, here's my lease. I'm using this as long-term rental. Grant him that exemption for a year. If he has a lease for 3 years, grant him that exemption for 3 years and make him have to prove that each year to keep that exemption. But please, please, don't use a bomb and blow up a bunch of people's affordable housing because you're targeting certain people in that building. Okay? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Any questions for clarification, members, for Mr. Crowley? We appreciate your
Thank you.
comments this morning. Sue Johnson, please.
Good morning, committee members. I'm a wife, mother, grandmother, and alum of the University of Hawaii, and a retired speech pathologist. My husband and I manage, under the auspices of Chris and Mary Cockett Estate, our home at 178 Makana Road. We are members and participants at Keavalai Church, donors to that church, to Maui Food Bank, to Maui Land Conservancy, and to Hospice Maui, and I belong to Kanoa Senior Center. We have a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom home, which my parents built in their full-time residence as 1969 on a short-term basis. We are paying $34,000 annually in property taxes. We have paid as high as $42,500 in the past. We pay $19,700 last year in GT and TAT. For 15 years after my folks' death and prior to our retiring, my husband and I rented our home on a long-term basis. We employed a rental agent, and 100% of our renters were from the mainland. Discovery, which is developing all around us, has told me they'll be interested in buying our property. I told them I'm not interested in having the money our home would bring. I want to be able to continue to come to our Maui home for a few times a year for 1 to 3 month stays. At this point, the ability to rent my home on a short-term basis allows our family to enjoy many hours, days, and weeks in our bountiful Makana. I know I'm fortunate to receive this precious heritage. It gives me great pleasure to share my Hawaiian heritage with our guests to help them understand what this special place means to me. Our tenants also support Maui County restaurants, tour associations, and commercial businesses. We are in a residential neighborhood rather than a hotel zone, and we maintain our home as a single-family residence with no weddings or gatherings allowed. If I'm not to maintain our home on a short-term basis, there's almost no chance that anyone other than an exceedingly wealthy person from somewhere other than Maui would buy my property. There are multimillionaires who are erecting gated, fenced-in estates all around us. They generally cut off ocean views from the road in front of their homes. They understand almost nothing about Maui, and their homes stand vacant for most of the year. Please allow our family to continue to be able to rent our Makana home on a short-term basis as a single-family residence, as we do not have the privileges a hotel has. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any questions for clarification for Ms. Johnson? Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Catherine Clark, please.
Aloha, council members. My name is Catherine Clark, and I'm a board member of the Maui Vacation Rental Association. A question always comes up as to whether the commercial tax category for STR properties is fair to the condos that are renting short-term. There are significant differences between the two. Tom had a great example. Another would be to use Mauna Kai on the same beach, with 2 acres of land, 210 bedrooms, a restaurant hosting parties, front desk, gym, deli, and sports rental shop. You really can't say that this could be comparable to a home on the same beach with the same amount of property. In that case, they would be able to rent 6 bedrooms, absolutely no amenities. They can't even invite grandma over for lunch. So no matter how frequently a condo unit may party or disrupt their guests, their neighbors, the condo will not lose their right to vacation rent. STR homes could lose their permit for being a bad neighbor. Condos can build a business complete with website and returning clients that can be sold when they sell their unit. The STR permit is non-transferable, has no value beyond the current owner. Condos do not go through a permitting process and pay an annual permit fee. They do not need the $1 million liability policy naming the County of Maui as an additional insured. This alone can be an expense of $1,400 to $2,200 per year for an STRH home. I agree with the restrictions placed on the STR homes, but I also feel it's important to recognize that they are not the same as condos or hotels and should not be taxed the same. With a property that rents in the lower price range, hotel would make the STR unviable. There's an older home on an oceanfront property on the North Shore. At the hotel tax category, that home would need to rent for 55.09 nights before their tax would be covered. At 70% occupancy, that would be 78 calendar nights. If we truly want to treat everyone the same, every short-term rental should simply pay X number of nights rent as their property tax. That would be fair for everyone. But right now, you can look at some hotels paying their property tax with 4 to 7 nights of rent, but then an STR home with as many as 55 nights of rent. And what about the ag properties? On one hand, we're requiring them to be farming. On the other hand, this proposed ordinance is saying they're a hotel. Which one is it? So it just seems unfair that these properties are always singled out. There are only a few of them, and these are the guys that did the right thing and came forward to get a permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Clark, any questions for Ms. Clark for clarification? Okay, having none, thank you. Ms. Clark was the last in the chambers. We'll ask Ms. Lono, anyone in Hana would like to provide testimony this morning?
Good morning, Chair. This is Dawn Lono in Hana, and there is no one waiting to testify.
Okay, thank you very much. Lanai, Ms. Fernandez, anyone wishing to provide testimony?
Good morning, Chair. This is Denise Fernandez on Lanai, and there is no one waiting to testify.
Thank you. Ms. Alkan, Molokai, anyone wishing to provide testimony?
Good morning, Chair. This is Ella Alcon on Molokai, and there is no one here waiting to testify.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies, for your assistance to the committee. Okay, the chair has not received any more testimony. Okay, you're going to need to sign up a lot sooner than at the last second. You can come forward.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, County Council. My name is Margit Tolman. I'm an STR owner. Sorry for my late sign up, but I feel I need to express my concern about a different taxation. My short-term rental property is right next where I'm residing. I signed up at the beginning when the law got in place to have opportunities and looking at my retirement. At this time, I have a home and a cottage, and both are long-term rented. I started to rent out one room short-term 2 years ago in order to provide the long-term rentals because one of my tenants is my employee. She lost her home. There was no place for her to go. So we needed another solution for her. She moved in. We have one room we rent out for short-term rental, and we support the rent with the income. If the taxation goes up, I need to make different decisions. And it will just trickle down to those who need the most support. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your testimony. Please fill out the form for the council's records, please. Thank you so much. Okay, anyone else? Members, with no further requests for testimony, we shall close testimony for today's meeting. No objection. Okay, thank you. So ordered. May I direct you to your agenda? First item is BF 84 under the heading of Intergovernmental Agreement with the State of Hawaii Department of Health. We are in receipt of County Communication 17-351 from the Chief of Police, and he has transmitted to us a proposed bill for an ordinance to allow the mayor to enter into intergovernmental agreement State of Hawaii Department of Health. Okay, members, it says this is more about prohibiting the sale of tobacco and electronic smoking devices to persons under the age of 21. This morning we have Lieutenant Migita from the Police Department. Lieutenant, any comments on this request?
No, I don't, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Budget Director, any comments on this request?
No, not at this time, but we're available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, members, this is a agreement for us to receive small sums of money. Ms. Carvello, questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Ms. Satai?
No questions, Chair.
Ms. Sugimura?
No questions, Chair.
Ms. Cochran?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, departments, for being here. So it looks like $8,000 to be given to the department in order to carry out a state law prohibiting tobacco and electronic, I guess, devices being sold to underage, to 21 or under. Is that okay? Thank you. And Chair,
yes,
follow up. Thank you. And so, is that sufficient? Enough money? It doesn't sound like a whole lot.
Well, actually, it's the amount of enforcement had been gone down from 4 in the previous year down to 3, so I believe that it should be enough.
So three operations,
a minimum
or
of 3 operations per year. Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think I saw a minimum of 3.
Minimum
is
3.
What you need to do. Okay, and so, Chair, can I ask?
Sure.
So is there a penalty or what happens if they're caught selling?
If they're in violation, then the retail establishment would be subject to being cited by the officers. The officers that are working alongside of with the health department officials.
And does that entail a penalty or a revocation of any permits or licenses of any kind?
That would be determined upon the issuance of the citation.
Okay. Okay. No, thank you. I mean, acceptance of all monies to help you folks do your job. So, just curious about those questions, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Guzman, any questions on this request?
Just some clarification. So the 8,000 is going to be used for the 3 or 4, I guess, operations that would be covered by the state? Because I know you would have additional ones that you would do on your own. Is that correct? Because you have a decoy program as well.
Yes, we have other operations. However, this one in particular is geared primarily for the underage sale of tobacco with the health department, and it's a minimum of 3 operations.
So does that 3 operations cover the payment for the decoys? Are they going to be part of that?
Well, that will cover our overtime expenses for the officers, but the decoys are actually under the Department of Health.
Okay, so then that will cover their expenses.
Yes, they have their own. This will cover everything in its entirety, which includes it's primarily for the officers and the overtime that's incurred, but the decoys are also covered.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we're not expending additional county funds for a state mandate.
No, this is it. This should cover everything.
Okay,
right here.
okay. Chair, decoys are people that are brought in to pretend like they're underage, and they actually are underage when they try to purchase things. So, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question of clarification on the actual problem. So if we're going from being required to do 4 to 3, does that mean that, is that because the problem is perceived to be going down? You know, we have less incidences of this, or is that just a purely fiscal decision?
Yes, Councilman, I believe that it's a purely fiscal decision on behalf of the Department of Health at this time.
Okay, so what's your perception of the problem? Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same, or is it are we able to discourage it?
As far as the sales go, I don't have any particular numbers on the sales itself, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that at this time.
Okay, maybe, are we going to get some of that kind of information, though? I mean, based on the money that's being spent on the program?
Yes, we can provide that information.
Okay, be nice to see if it's actually effective.
Sure.
What we're doing. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we'll follow up on that request, Ms. King. Yeah, we would think the health department would have the statistics of the measurements, so we can request that. Any further questions or comments on this request, members? Anything further? Okay, then it's straightforward. I believe the chair will entertain a motion to recommend to council passage on first reading be ordered to print a bill for an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the county of Maui to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the state of Hawaii Department of Health, filing of all appropriate communications, and allowing staff to make any non-substantive changes.
So move.
Okay, I have a motion by Ms. Sugimura, seconded by Ms. Crivello. Any further discussion, members? With none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion passes with 7 ayes, 2 excused. May I direct you to BF 85. This is also an intergovernmental agreement with the United States Secret Service. We have County Communication 17-352 from the Chief of Police with a proposed bill for an ordinance. This is to enter into an agreement with the United States Secret Service regarding payment of expenses for joint operations between United States Secret Service and the Maui Police Department. Okay, this morning we have Lieutenants Mark Vickers and Derek Lopez with us. So, gentlemen, thank you for being with the committee. Who's going to give us a briefing on the request, please?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, council members. Basically, this MOU is to enter into an agreement with the Secret Service involving our fledgling cybercrimes unit. And right now, currently, we have Detective Matt Biggis, who's just returned from a 5-week training in Alabama. So basically, in a nutshell, it's the Secret Service has given us approximately $30,000 worth of equipment, to include a couple laptops, some desktops, and some forensic equipment, software, and training to investigate cyber crimes. And so what the trade-off is, whenever we investigate cyber crimes and using our forensic analysis tools, Detective Biggis will fill out a federal form and submit that form. And so this agreement is a win-win situation for both the department and the county.
Okay, thank you for that, Lieutenant Lopez. Mr. Lieutenant Vickers, anything you want to share?
No, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Budget Director, any comments on the request?
No, not at this time, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Regan. Members, you have the attached memorandum of understanding. It has been reviewed by Corporation Counsel and Deputy Shepherd. She is present if need be. I'm going to ask you if you have questions or comments regarding the consideration. Ms. Crivello?
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Just for clarification, in addition to, you mentioned $30,000 for equipment and training. Does this include any kind of payroll? Say if you're working on a certain case and you have overtime or what have you, is it just the equipment and the just clarification? Does it include any extra costs that comes with the operations?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Councilwoman, the $30,000 was evaluation of the computer system, the diagnostics, the training, and the software. If in the future there is overtime incurred, we'll be submitting those necessary forms to the Secret Service for reimbursement.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Atai, any questions at this time?
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Sugimura?
So question, based upon your page 7 of your exhibit, it says that there's $15,000 pursuant to Treasury Executive Office of Asset Forfeiture Directive number 18. They're saying there's $15,000. Is it to be used for that type of personnel expenses to cover some of it?
Lieutenant?
Good morning. Yes, for the memorandum of understanding, once the budget is determined by the U.S. Secret Service, each island will get a set amount of monies to cover such things as training, overtime, or equipment. So that would be included in the monies procured by the Secret Service.
Thank you. And I'm just curious then, do you also interact with our county? Because we have a pretty good cybersecurity, and does the police also interact, or does this interact
Yeah,
with us?
our cybersecurity.
Oh, okay. I thought it would come through our IT department also. So.
Well, for clarification, this would be specific to handling criminal cases. So if the criminal case comes to our department and our detectives are assigned to investigate it, those are the instances where these monies could be appropriated.
Thank you.
This also the other component of ops with MIS also that you'll see during the budget's review. Ms. Cochran, questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Department, for being here. So just following up on that item G, which is in reference to entitlement for overtime costs to any one law enforcement official cannot exceed $15,000 during the fiscal year. So, so is that sufficient in your mind? So it says for overtime cannot exceed the $15,000 per law enforcement official.
Lieutenant?
So for that figure, that is the figure that the United States Secret Service sets as a mandate, as a maximum per officer in the task force. However, they are basing their individual state numbers based upon their own statistics. And at this point, I believe last year's, which we aren't part of the task force as of yet, but last year's budget for each entity in the task force was $9,000 or around there. So it would be much less for us. If that's enough, I would say probably not, but that's what the department would be getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, again, better something than nothing.
Yes.
And so is it, Chair, a follow-up. So is this, I guess, collaboration of sorts or working with the Secret Service entitled our department or IT to tap into, I guess, a broader, bigger range of information base or things of that nature? Is that what this agreement is generally about? So you can tap into the higher level, I don't know, information base, I guess is the question.
Lieutenant?
So as far as databases or anything, we would still be utilizing our current databases that we are using. However, this agreement will allow us to utilize the experiences as well as networking information from other agencies in the task force.
Okay. All right. No, very good. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Guzman? Oh, I'm sorry, Lieutenant.
Chair, may I add to that?
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Chairwoman Cochran, on top of those lines, it gives us another avenue on which to better investigate our cases. So instead of having to send any one particular case outside of the department, we're able to investigate the case as a whole within the department. And it gives us more resources. It'll help us to investigate the case quicker, seek prosecution faster, and it will help appease the victims a lot quicker if we just kept it within the department.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, very good. Thank you for sharing that, too. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Guzman?
Yeah, just the mutual understanding agreement that's been covered by my colleagues for the reimbursement, the maximum reimbursement of the 15,000. So that's covered. On the when you're explaining the use of the new equipment and the expansion of how it's supposed to be more efficient within the various departments, I know that we've had our own electronic crimes division in existence for more than 10 years plus. When you're explaining it's supposed to become more efficient and more broad, what do you mean by that? Is that we were always in lack of equipment, but what type of equipments are we talking about? More computers, more what?
Lieutenant?
Yes, Councilman Guzman. With this software and with this technology, it gives us the capabilities of investigating any digital piece of equipment, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's a laptop, any portable device.
Forensics.
Forensics.
Okay, got it.
And what it does is it allows us to dig into the forensics of that one particular item that we're exploring, and it doesn't leave a digital footprint. It allows us to take a snapshot of what's there within the item that we're looking at, and it allows us to gather evidence without destroying the evidence that's already there.
That was our lack of thereof in the past, when we would have a computer and couldn't do the forensics on what was the data within because it was corrupted. And you're able to, with this new software, new equipment, technologies, to go in and pull out some of that data.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I think this is a really important issue in our community. And so what I wanted to ask was, is this new software, is it mainly focused on cyber protection for government agencies and attacks against our local government, or is this also going to benefit local businesses, high-tech companies? Are you looking at, cyber protection outside of the government?
Lieutenant?
Councilwoman, as we all know, the Maui Police Department, we investigate all criminal cases, whether it's a private entity, whether it's a government agency, or it's a business. We have the capabilities of investigating any criminal activity.
Okay, so this will aid in the greater cyber protection for our community. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. What we would like some clarification, Department, if you can help us, or maybe Ms. Shepherd, which is subsection H. We understand the cap on overtime per officer or official. Yet this document does not obligate funding. Funding will be provided through other documents. So can you give us some comment, please, Lieutenant? What are we talking about, other documents, please?
Chair, so at this time the memorandum of understanding was written up, the Secret Service had not finished their budget. So they had provided me with information regarding last year's budget, which monies was distributed to each agency's task force members. So at the time this was written up, they had not completed that budget and had not had a determination of how much monetary, how much monies would be given to each task force agency.
Okay, because this, I'm assuming, is a reimbursement type of agreement, right?
Yes.
So are we going to expend our resources before their funding? So I don't know, Ms. Shepherd or Mr. Uyoka, so since we're talking about future documents, this approval, does that grandfather those documents we haven't seen yet or looked at? Or do we need to review the other documents when it becomes into existence?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is the second documents will just provide funding. The outline of the agreement is contained within the corners of this document. So my understanding is MPD will make sure the money's there before time and things are spent on it to make sure funding is available before they do any work. So I believe that passing this document right now would be fine, assuming that, I shouldn't even say assuming, MPD will make sure funding is available before they expend anything. Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Guzman.
Oh, are you finished, Chair?
I'm happy to allow you to
thank you.
entertain your question.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on, as part of the reimbursement process, it appears as though you have to submit an audit to the feds and some type of, documentation of expenditures. So is that going to cost your department time and overtime to prepare those type of audits that are to be submitted?
Lieutenant?
So, in relation to these additional documents, another, besides the budgetary information that we provided, is also a form that our department had to sign relating to, such as the banks that our county uses, the routing numbers. So that may also be referred to as the other documents, which have just been completed recently in preparation for this. But as far as your question regarding the overtime, as far as auditing, that would normally come within the normal duties of the task force. If it does entail a personnel to do the audits for submission for the reimbursements, that would be included within the parameters of the MOU as part of being on the task force, which would be reimbursed by the monies obtained from the Secret Service.
Okay, but this is all going to be triggered, Chair, by first of all making sure that the money's there, and then we do the work, and then the audits, and then submit for reimbursement.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So they got to keep good records for the feds. Because it's not a grant per se, this is like almost in exchange for service, fee for service, type of agreement for service. You're required to do a federal single audit on this agreement. Is that the department's understanding regarding federal auditing? Would you be required to do that?
I am unaware of that.
Yeah. Budget Director, are you aware if the department will go through a federal single audit requirement?
I'm not aware. I can look into it and get back to you, Chair.
Okay, because I want to know who's going to pay for that if it's a requirement. So we'll send that request for it. Thank you. Members, further questions, comments on this request? Ms. Cochran.
Thank you, Chair. In the agreement, it's stating that the task force should work with public and private corporations identified as part of the United States critical infrastructure. Who are those entities? Do you have an idea of who those would be?
Department?
Basically, the police department investigates any entity that comes under the jurisdiction of the Maui County Police Department. So we're looking at the entire Maui County with the assistance of any federal or state agencies that we can work in collaboration with.
So governmental entities, along with private.
Yes.
If there seems to be something occurring, to be under investigation.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, members, that you may have on this request? I think it's something we need to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
The bad guys keep going better and faster, so we need to do our part. Okay, so the chair is...
Sorry, Chair.
Yes, Ms. Cochran.
Before you call for the vote, so it says that this has only been created within the year. This is that new. We've just kicking this into gear within this past year.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah,
yes. Mr. Chair, yes, it's been started very recently within this year.
Okay. Yeah, well, need to definitely supportive of getting it going.
In this day and age where cyber crimes is becoming the norm with social media, it's about time that we've added this to our department. And we're looking forward to receiving the training necessary from the Secret Service and the rest of the government agencies. And really, cybersecurity is the wave of the future. That's what we need to address.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Chair, thank you. Just to follow up on something you said earlier, because you mentioned that you were going on last year's estimates, but that this is a new program. So what estimates did you have from last year? Is it just new for Maui? Is that the implication?
Department.
No, so it's new for Maui, but there have been some agencies already involved in the Hawaii Electronic Crimes Task Force. So that was the budgetary monies that were given to those agencies in the previous fiscal year.
In the previous year. So statewide, different agencies statewide?
Yes.
That's what you're referring to. So do we have to, are they taking that same pot of money, presumably, and splitting it up now between more agencies, or are we expecting to get like similar to what similar agencies received last year?
At this time, I cannot say. It depends on the budget that the U.S. Secret Service gives to each electronic crimes task force.
Okay, but there's not like a pot of money for each state and then it just gets divided up among however many agencies?
Yes, that is correct.
That's how it is? Okay, so the more agencies there are that are making these agreements, the less money we're each going to get? Is that the implication?
I can't speak on behalf of the Secret Service, but I would presume that if there is more,
secret.
well, if they have more agencies, they'd probably provide more monies.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I hope that's the case, but I'm really glad that we're moving on this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else, members? Okay, the chair will just state that, again, I've been a proponent for this for over 10 years. For me, the money is, it's a factor, but the key thing is our ability to, as the lieutenants have shared, is have access to the big federal agencies that have the manpower and resource. So we're talking about Homeland Security. We're talking about Secret Service, FBI, because internet is not just now a county or state law. You're dealing with feds. And so we're dealing with national agencies that can, you won't be in state court, let me tell you. You'll be seeing the magistrate in federal court for this stuff. So the chair would entertain a motion to recommend to council passage on first reading, be ordered to print a bill for an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the county of Maui to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the United States Secret Service, USSS, regarding payment of expenses from joint operations between USSS and the Maui Police Department, filing of all appropriate communications, and allowing staff to make any appropriate non-substantive adjustments.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Carvalho, seconded by Ms. Sugimura. Any further discussion, members? With none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion passes with 6 ayes, 3 excused. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your assistance this morning. We appreciate it. Okay, we're going to take a recess till 10:10, and then we'll finish up with the last 2 items before committee. We shall return to order. Before we take up the next item, members, with no objections, we shall receive all written communication that was submitted for today's meeting.
No objections.
Okay, thank you. We shall have those received. Thank you, members. May I direct you now to BF 42 under the heading of tax classification for transit accommodations. We have, let's see, a miscellaneous communication, May 28, 2015. And then I submitted a proposed bill for consideration for today, March 9, 2017, to amend 3.48.305 regarding commercial and highest and best use regarding taxation for certain properties. Plus, I'm kind of happy part of the testimony you, Chair, heard this morning, because one of the things I am looking at is splitting out hotel and resort and splitting that category too. Okay, because we have bastardized taxation and zoning real well in this county. So, the chair continues to put forward proposals for your consideration and the community's review, because we're there to take it one step at a time. Okay, so we already know they don't want adjustments on the ag. So that's why we didn't move BF 74. But we are still living with the impacts of not moving BF 74 with all these other projects that come before Land Use Committee. Okay, today is another one. Again, we're not talking about commercial, residential on this item. We're talking about commercial, which is two different things. So I'll have Mr. Teruya give us comments from Finance and Real Property Division regarding this consideration this morning. Mr. Teruya.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. I'm Scott Teruya, Real Property Tax Administrator. First of all, on BF 42, as the amendment to commercial for short-term rental home, the basic change is to repeal the amendment made in December 14, Ordinance 4165, Bill 73, to remove the parcel that does not serve as the owner's primary residence and has been granted a short-term rental home permit, a transient vacation rental permit, or a conditional permit allowing transient vacation use to be classified as commercial. So that is being repealed. Chairman, purpose of this amendment really from a taxation standpoint is from uniformity for real property tax purposes, having similar uses being taxed in the same tax classification. The hotel resort class was established for accommodations of properties used for durations of less than 6 months in duration. While I hear a lot of comments today about how it's not like a hotel, and I can agree, and that's an amendment that the chair is proposing in the future, I don't hear a lot of comment about how they're like McDonald's. From a land use standpoint, that's what a commercial is. Commercial is like properties of Foodland, Long's, Napa Auto Parts, McDonald's. Those are our commercial properties. So just to stick them in a place as a placeholder, it seemed more like a rate purpose and not a classification purpose. The question to you would be is if the classification of commercial was to raise higher than a hotel rate, would they still want to be in commercial? That's the question, because ultimately we're trying to put them in a place that is uniform like all other properties. And our proposal today is to do that, is to put them in where all other short-term rental properties of less than 6 months are. And that's what I have, Chairman, as opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Members, questions at this time? Ms. King, any questions you want to pose at this time?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the differentiation between a commercial residential, and commercial, I'm confused because this description still refers to something that doesn't serve as the owner's primary residence and has been granted a short-term rental home permit. Is there an instance where that would be just a purely commercial property that would have a short-term rental home permit? It would not be commercial residential, but would fall in this category?
Department?
Thank you, Chairman. In my understanding, I'm not very astute to the planning code, but my understanding is if you're an owner-occupant and have an STRH permit, that those properties are considered commercialized residential. And I can defer to Corporation Counsel for that clarification.
No, I do understand that, but I'm saying that that's what's referred to in this description. But the chair said we're not talking about the commercial residential. We're only talking about commercial. So, what type of commercial property would fall into this description, or is this description just meant to? Is this piece of the description just meant to make an exception of the commercial residential?
Corporation Counsel.
Thank you, Chair. It's not an exception just to commercial residential. It's actually an exception to the highest and best use classification. If you read the first part of subsection B of 348-305, it talks about assigning land to one of the general classes, major consideration given to zoning, state, and county, and establishing the general plan of the state and other such factors that influence highest and best use, except that. And then it states that basically a parcel that does not serve as the owner's primary residence and has one of those short-term rental home type permits will be put into commercial without regard to its highest and best use. So basically, this is a carve out as an exception to the rule.
Okay, but so I'm still kind of confused. So that parcel would have normally been commercial residential?
No.
And okay.
No.
So it wasn't.
Commercial, I'm sorry. I apologize for talking over you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, commercialized residential is another carve-out. You have to be the owner's primary residence and has been granted a bed and breakfast type permit, but the key part is owner's primary residence. So if not for that carve-out, it would probably be highest and best use in, I'm not an appraiser, but my understanding is it would probably fall under hotel and resort without that specific carve-out for commercial, and for the ones that serve as the owner's primary residence, commercialized residential. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we're keeping those out as exceptions and those incidences to this bill. Am I looking at the right one too? I have two transmittals from the chair. One has a 2 in parentheses after it. And
It's
both have the
attached
same
to
date.
March 9th, Ms. King. The March
Okay,
9th,
there's a
2017.
okay. In Granicus, there's a proposed bill from committee chair, and there's a parentheses 2, and then there's a proposed, and they both have the same date. Proposed bill from committee chair, but they both are dated March 9th. So
The one with the parentheses, Ms.
the one
King?
with parentheses. Okay, that's what I've been looking at. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Turiu, any other comments?
Chair, just for point of clarification, if this is repealed, this section number 4, B4, it'll revert back to prior to 2014 and how we classified properties. And it would have been hotel resort prior to 2014.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around what type of if we're gonna be, what type of commercial would be zoned hotel, would fall into this that's doing short-term rental homes. Are we talking about condos?
Councilor.
If I may, Ms. King.
Yeah.
I think what's happening right now is if you have one of these permits and it does not serve as your primary residence, you will be commercial, regardless of what your prior classification was, what your zoning is, what your use would be. Actually, I don't even know what your actual use is. If you have one of those permits, it's no matter what's going on, if you have that permit and it's not your primary residence, you will be classified as commercial without regard to highest and best use. So I'm not sure if you want examples of what would be commercial if it was hotel, or if you want examples of the types of properties that have these permits and fall into commercial. I guess that's what I'm unclear on.
Well, I guess maybe if you could just briefly explain what is highest and best use. Is there a higher and better use than using your non-residents for an STR that it would fall under it would revert to commercial.
I think
commercial residential.
If I may, Chair. Thank you. Highest and best use looks at a whole bunch of factors. Again, this isn't my area of expertise, but one of the main ones would be zoning. If you have hotel zoning, you have different uses that are available to you versus R1 or apartment. Condo isn't necessarily a zoning, but condos, I guess I won't even go there yet. We'll get into that in the next bill. But for highest and best use, typically they'll look at a whole bunch of different factors, including the zoning of the property. So if you're underutilizing your property in the sense that you have industrial property where you can, I don't know if Mr. Spence will jump in, but I'm just using it as an example. If you could have a home on industrial property, you're not necessarily doing the highest and best use by having a home on the property. Your highest and best use would be industrial. That's kind of where highest and best use comes into play for real property taxation purposes. Thank you.
Okay, but then, so for residents that are in their zone single family or zone residential that are, being accepted under this, what is highest and best use what it's zoned for, or is it whatever you could do to make the most money?
Mr. Uyoka.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is highest and best use when you have a permit of types, whether it be a conditional use permit, a bread and breakfast permit, transient vacation rental permit, that would be now your highest and best use because that is a permitted use on your property. And therefore, under normal classification principles, you'd probably go to the highest and best use classification. However, based on Section B4, if you does not serve as your owner's primary residence and you have one of those permits, you would be placed into commercial, just as that's what the law states, without regard to highest and best use.
Okay, that's how it is now, or that's what we're proposing?
That's how it is now.
Okay. Okay, so we're taking that out.
That's the proposal.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Crivello, questions at this time?
Right now.
Thank
But
you.
I'll have questions. Thank you.
Mr. Otai?
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Sugimura?
No questions at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Cochran?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Turi, for being here. So what do we stand to gain here monetarily? Have you factored that in at all? Guesstimations of sort?
Department.
Thank you, Chair. In our estimate, it affects about 186 parcels or units, and the net is about 2.5 million.
Okay, that's a nice chunk, thank you. And so number 3, in reference to timeshare, this is saying now that it will be classified as commercial and no longer timeshare?
Mr. Terrio?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Let me rephrase that. I was looking at the total for the hotel rate. So the net difference is $640,000.
Sorry. So going back, I guess, to that, Mr. Turia. So we stand to gain in your guesstimation $640,000. Okay. And then I guess back to my question then, Chair. 3, the parcel is subject to timeshare plan as defined, shall be classified as timeshare. That stays, so it does, the heading of what this proposal is does not change that term. Basically, yeah,
Chairman,
it doesn't become.
Mr. Terrio?
Thank you. That is correct. Nothing else is changing. The timeshare classification is subject to 514E, and that would have no impact on timeshares.
Okay. Well, that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Guzman, any questions at this time?
I understand the B4, the deletion of it, what you're trying to do here. And I recall that being incorporated in 2014. But my question is, when we're going to, from commercial to the highest and best use, and that highest and best use would be hotel use. The difference there is moving from $4.56 to $9.37.
Mr. Terrio?
Thank you, Chair. For clarification, I think the commercial rate is something other than that, but the difference is $2.09 between the two classifications.
$2.09.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess the units, it's not very much units, and I kind of refer to the testimony that we heard today. If we're going to the best and highest use, these properties that we're dealing with, right, as it is currently written, do not have the same abilities to build as hotels, like other commercial businesses around their area. as well as conventions and things like that. I'm struggling with this, Chair, because of the ability for hotels to do so much more versus these type of entities or units. And to charge them at the hotel highest and best rate use, it doesn't seem like there's a large discrepancy. It seems like it's not fair. If they were able to do more.
Is it fair to do a hotel in residential? That's the other side of the coin, right?
True, but then if we're going to charge them hotel, but highest and best use, we should allow them at some point to act as one. So that's the other counter argument.
No.
Yeah, of course. So we're here to vet these things through. So definitely, I'm eager to hear my other colleagues as we discuss this further, and maybe even the planning director and the discrepancies and how we can come up with some type of compromise. So thank you, Chair.
No, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Guzman. The chair is very aware, even if we wish it to be, there is no one silver bullet to solve this. It's going to take multiple adjustments in components of the total system. So, we took a crack at A. We're looking at these areas now. But the key area down the road is how it fits in and ties into a coordinated zoning chapter. Land use and taxation must be in sync. And that's my concern when we always do this variances for permits, because now to an action we're allowing something that wasn't planned to now be a permitted thing in a non-planned area. So we're dealing with a lot of those. Yes, Ms. Carvello?
Thank you, Chair. In your comments in regards to zoning, so hotel has actual zonings, if I understand it, resorts and what have you. However, with the STRs, this bill proposes not change in zoning, but actual tax classification for real property. So is the STR, how does our code differ with hotel and STR? So STR is less than 180 days. And then you have the hotel, which, it has other commercial businesses and all of this. So will the classification allow what the zoning allows? Or do we go into, because these STRs, which has been permitted and what have you in the residential area, I don't know why that was ever allowed to begin with, but you have a owner occupancy sort of situation, or you don't. You come in and out. So I'm just trying to understand how we differ with our codes and zoning and real property tax classification. How does that all differ? Or is there a difference? Or do we go in and also recognize that these STRs, which are in the residential area, is actual hotels, then do we still leave it as 180 days? I'm just trying to understand how we differ all that.
I'll let the departments give their component. For some, we're working through the parameters of what is state law, their definition of short-term rental, regarding also State Department of Taxation on what is considered resident versus non-resident. This county has always supported the resident benefits. That's why we have things like circuit breaker, homeowners exemptions, and whatnot. We've always made a fiscal decision from the territory days on how we're going to look at taxation. So that's why it's kind of interesting with all these permits, because at one point in time, planning department would not be in favor And at those days, the easy term was allowing interim or spot zoning to permits. That was the phrase, spot zoning. If you guys recall that in the 1960s, that was the issue, and that's how we got a lot of these problems, and that's how we came into planned development issues with the Puamanos and whatnot. Okay, so my thing, members, is what I'm proposing to do is small steps, baby steps, toward the eventual goal, which is to bring this back into more synchronization and compliance. Because I don't know how the departments deal with all these variances of permits approval. Because now zoning is dependent upon the permit, not the zoning. So how good is the zoning then? So, you know, the instructions that the department has is you apply taxation as the law is currently written. We're going to have people who are going to be upset. But that's the only way we're going to force the change to amend the law to make it fairer and more accurate to the current times. Okay. So that's their direction. What is the law as currently standing? And there's issues with the law as currently standing. I think there's some inequities, and that is why I'm presenting you opportunities to see if this is something you want to move forward. And this is one of the steps I'm proposing for you to look at, which is this component, the next bill, 45. I am preparing to split resort and hotels because I think one of the easiest ways from the bigger picture is to make similar uses under similar taxation philosophy. So, I'm sorry, we don't, we're not in this area. We're in recess. You don't.
Sunshine in the light, and I've got you.
Okay, we shall return to order. My apologies for the disruption, members. Okay, we are back to item 42. And some of the comments and concerns Ms. Crivello had shared regarding this subject. Again, you know, it's taken decades, scores of years to reach where we are today. So there's no silver bullet, and we are not going to solve this issue today with one action. But today is the key to discussion. And here are various comments about the proposal. I don't profess that this is the silver bullet. So I'm happy to hear your comments, members and those from the community, on what they thought was bad points, if there was good points, items of consideration that is not currently included. We will consider all those things, okay, regarding this component of taxation. Mr. Terua, any comments regarding Ms. Crivello's issues or concerns she had stated earlier?
Chair, I apologize. Is there any chance to repeat the question? Sorry.
I don't know if I can repeat it.
That might be hard.
Yeah. Anyway, actually, my inquiry or for clarity is we're coming in with a request to classify into hotel for tax purposes, but we also have zoning for hotel purposes. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to distinguish how does it differ with zoning and actual use, or at the best use, or however that classification comes forth, because I think the existing permit holders would question on SCR is less than 180 days, and then the hotel can be whatever and allow different commercial businesses, whereas the SCR is quite restricted on that part. So I'm just trying to figure out how does the classification and zoning mix or no mix?
Chairman.
Mr. Turia.
Thank you, Chair. I guess it would be easier if we only had two classifications, you're either residential or you're not, so like other municipalities, but we don't. The classifications are, we're talking about 22,000 units in the hotel and resort class. And that's what they are. They're big classifications that we try to, we're not planning department, we're the assessment division. We classify properties with like uses as defined in the ordinance. The ordinance says anything less than 6 months in duration is this bucket. It's titled hotel and resort. It could be titled anything, but ultimately the bucket is less than 6 months in duration. And that's how we define the classification in real property. The other classifications are also large buckets based on land use. For example, commercial. For example, industrial. Even though they are somewhat alike, they are different. But you as a body have the opportunity to collapse classifications and make them similar or one. In the city and county of Honolulu, years back, maybe around about 10 years, they collapsed residential and apartment to become residential. Because in theory, they're generally long-term rentals. Why? I don't know, but you can. Sometimes having too many classifications stratifies it so far down that we get into these situations. But what we're trying to introduce is a system that can be supported and is streamlined. So we have a classification system that is much simpler than we have to have too many exceptions to. And that's part of the larger picture that Mr. Okama was talking about further. I understand there's a lot of testimony about how you're not like a hotel. And maybe that's a good discussion for this body to get into the situation of getting that on the agenda and separate hotel from resort so we don't have further discussions about how I'm not like a hotel. But in order to do that, we need to pass these little bills to get to the bigger bill. So I think these bills here are a small part of the larger wheel that we're trying to streamline the entire code to what we hear from the public and from you folks. So, I thought this was an easy bill to pass, but obviously it is not. But, like anything, you gotta address it. So this is one of many bills to clarify and clean up the tax code that is inconsistent to my eyes. From an administrative standpoint, we're trying to bring bills that clean up stuff that don't fit. And that's why I asked whether or not they still want commercial or are they looking for a rate? Because if the rate goes to something else and they don't like it, then it wasn't because they wanted to be in commercial, they wanted a rate. So I'm just trying to clarify what we're trying to do. And the proposal here is actually to streamline our classification system. And that is ultimately the goal and the measure behind the larger picture that's coming to separate hotel, resort, and other bills, including BF 45. So, Chairman, I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gravella. Ms. Sugimura?
So I'm just curious as we talk about all of these issues, as we did during budget, right? Whenever we talk about short-term vacation rentals and we have this enforcement, and I wonder if this might be a way that we can get planning to talk about that, because I think it's a component of this and the whole discussion of enforcement and how it fits into trying to achieve the goals of the tax department.
We have the planning director, Ms. Ben, so I'll ask him if he would care to join us and allow him some comment. Yeah, but I don't want to get stuck so much in some of the operational challenges, which on the enforcement side. We know enforcement is an issue. We hear it every year. We hear it from the community every year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we made adjustments in this year's budget to support enforcement on a stronger level. And during budget, we hope to get some good comments on the results of the 1 year support we gave them. So that would be for another meeting, though. Yeah, Ms. Sugimura. Mr. Spence, thank you for joining us. I know you was following the conversation and discussion. Is there comments you would like to share with us, please?
Sure, and thank you for asking me down, Mr. Chairman. I hear a couple things as I listen to the discussion. I'll say I appreciate the discussion that somehow this committee could separate resort from the actual overnight accommodations, the hotel use. Without seeing something else, I'd be hesitant to comment on that a lot. But I do hear the members ask questions that what's the difference between hotel and short-term rental homes. Within the hotel, of course, you have your overnight accommodations, and you have, in quite a number of cases, you have hundreds of rooms within a single building or a series of buildings within close proximity. The other things, and so with a short-term rental home, basically you have a house. And the way that our permitting system is set up, you can have up to 6 bedrooms, and they would all be rented to one party, not multiple parties like you could in a B&B or in a hotel. Within the hotel district, besides overnight accommodations, you have eating and drinking establishments, restaurants, well, either with or without nightclubs, pharmacies and drugstores, music stores, personal business services, spas, those kinds of things. And you can't have any of those in a short-term rental home. Basically, all you can have within a short-term rental home is the overnight accommodations. And so this list of other uses that I just read, that's what I would consider the resort part, if the chairman pleases. I'm not a tax expert by any stretch of the imagination, but when I think about how properties should be taxed, and I think about a hotel, the hotel with its hundreds of rooms and restaurants and everything, I mean, you're taxing for a couple of reasons. One is off of that income potential, because you have these multiple units with people staying there, and for the most part, hotel rooms don't have kitchens, so they're either going to go out to eat or eat at the resort. And then, of course, entertainment. But then you're also taxing based on the impact that a use might have. So when you're talking hundreds of rooms, you're talking hundreds of vehicles per day in and out of one driveway and on those localized streets. You're talking about wastewater, and there's a whole fee set up for all that. But there's a lot more impact in a concentrated manner on a single property versus a short-term rental home that is basically a residence with, there's some debate which has more impact, but it's basically a residence that is, people are staying for less than 180 days. So that's kind of a really preemptory sort of comparison. The other thought, Mr. Chairman, I had on this was part of the purpose of the short-term rental home ordinance was to make the permitting system to allow short-term rental homes with more of an administrative, with a simpler process. You're inviting the people who are operating illegally to come in and apply for permits and become legal. And so we've issued about 207 permits just about now. What I hear from some of the testifiers is there would be a disincentive for people to come in and become legal if they were taxed at a higher rate. So again, I'm not a tax expert, but I know the purpose of getting short-term rental home permits established was to give the people an incentive to come in and become legal. And I would hate to disincentivize that again.
Thank you for those comments, Director. We appreciate those words you shared with us.
Chair.
Ms. Sugimura?
So if I could continue.
Yes.
Not on the enforcement, then I will wait for that. But can we talk about resort? So I think the Director Spence gave a summary of bed and breakfast, hotel, short-term vacation rentals, And if we're going to look at resort, could you then educate me as to what that resort would be in difference to the hotel? Because I'm just wondering if you go from short-term vacation rental, to be looked at commercial, which is, what they are, their business at their home, and take it all the way to hotel and looking at the benefits that Director Spence talked about and the differences of land use. It's quite diverse versus what is resort then, which is something you're going to explore later. But what is the difference? Maybe that needs to be the.
I'll have Mr. Ture give you a current perspective from real property tax, especially since they need to they need to put a value to an assessment.
Okay.
I'll have him explain how they're currently operating. But I can tell you, you and I know from watching the maturity of our visitor industry that through the decades, what pretty much we all understood in 1960 as hotels is not the same definition of a hotel in 2017. If you look at the code is pretty old, our definitions. And part of our issue is, do we need to now adjust the definitions also to match what we're trying to do through taxation? So I think Mr. Spence can appreciate that because he deals with interpretations, I would say, every day, if that's the right way of saying it. Yeah, thank you. So, Mr. Teria, if you can maybe respond to Ms. Sugimura and say how we currently doing this review and definitions of resort.
Thank you, Chair. As long as I've worked for the office, hotel and resort's always been one and the same. I don't see any difference between them. They're all accommodations. I know what a real hotel is in my mind. I don't know how to put that into definition, but I believe there are two different characteristics between a hotel and short-term rental, and that's why I think for some 10-odd years I had questioned, because I mentioned to the council in previous years that short-term rental condos and activities, the market fluctuates larger than a true hotel will, and that's why I feel at some point there should be a discussion whether or not this body would like to separate the two. But as far as zoning goes and et cetera, like for us, there's multiple hotel zoning, H1, H2, and et cetera. But from real property standpoint, we all treated them all one and the same. Anytime it's less than 180 days, they're in that same bucket. So we don't differentiate whether it's H1, H2, they're all hotel. So from real property standpoint, it's much more simpler than what the planning department goes through from the different stratified, different categories. So maybe Mr. Spence, or I'll defer to the chair at this time.
Ms. Sugimura?
So if I understand what you said, then you look at short-term vacation rentals as a what?
Chairman.
Mr. Terrell.
Because they're one and the same, we consider them hotel and resort. Until we start separating the definition of a hotel and a definition of resort, it's a hard question for me to answer, because if you want the real hotels to be a hotel, you can do that. If you want the real hotels to be considered resort, you can do that. I mean, the titles are just titles. For us, we looked at them as buckets in land classes. If you're less than 180 days, you're here. And so far, right now, the title is hotel and resort. But until we get that discussion on what you want to call a real hotel, what you want to call anything less than 6 months in duration will be a separate bucket. And how you call them or what you call them is really up to this body. It really doesn't matter to us. We just consider them as buckets.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Spence, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the definitions in our zoning code. Again, I mean, as the chair points out, and certainly I concur that our zoning and our tax classification should be in sync. I look at the definition of hotel for zoning purposes. Hotel or motel means transient vacation rental excluding bed and breakfast homes and short-term rental homes. So at least for zoning purposes, hotels, the large buildings, multiple units, is different than bed and breakfast homes and short-term rental homes. Then I also looked for a definition of resort, and we do not have a definition. It would, but kind of the list that I read off of all the different other uses you can do on a hotel zone property, those would be the resort part with the nightclubs and the personal services, et cetera.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Okay, I think I'm getting a little bit better handle on what we're trying to do here and how it relates to some of the testimony that we heard. And I don't know if in our lifetime we're ever going to be able to reconcile zoning with tax classification or land use as stated even in the community plans, because sometimes, I mean, I think the thing that gives me real heartburn is the definition of best and highest use, because from a person who's been dealing with things like affordable housing and lack of affordable rentals, to me, the best and highest use is a long-term rental, because that's what we're lacking. To you, the best and highest use is whatever makes the most money. And so I think there's we have to agree on what is best and highest use first, and if it's for tax purposes, it's going to be one thing. I think if it's for community planning, it's going to be another thing. So that's the first issue. The other issue is what was stated earlier by a couple of, or maybe three of our testifiers, as far as the threat to the long-term rentals. And that's probably the biggest issue with taking this paragraph 4 out. And so I would almost rather leave that in, but change it to say to make the exception be a parcel that does not serve as the owner's primary residence and has been leased long-term for whatever the period is, as evidenced by, the current lease, signed active lease or something like that, so that becomes one of the exceptions to this code here, to seeking what is generally known as best and highest use, being all about economics. So, because we don't have anything in here that says if they're renting it long-term, that they're and they don't live there, that they can be an exception to this tax code. So that, I would rather see something like that, which would still keep the short term would take them out as an exception, but would protect the long-term rentals, and whether it's renewed every time the lease is renewed, or they give a 3-year lease and they, something like that, so that we encourage folks who do have long-term rentals to keep them that way and not have to go through this onerous procedure of proving that they're renting it out long-term. And I'm not sure if that needs to be also specified as affordable or not, but I do, it scares me to think that people might lose their long-term rentals, because if someone's going to be classified anyway as in a higher classification, they might as well just rent it out short-term.
Current law allows the tenant with a long-term rental to have certain benefits currently. I'll have Mr. Teruya or Mr. Uyoka explain, but currently in the law, we allow renters who have documented agreements of long-term to ask for certain benefits. Gentlemen, which one of you want to explain the current benefit?
If I may, Member King, the current bill in the chair is discussing right now on the floor, it just talks about if you have a short-term rental home permit, and if this language is removed, you'd be classified at highest and best use.
No, I understand that. So what I'm saying is I would rather have the language stay in there, but refer to someone with a someone who's not a resident of their property but has a long-term lease.
So essentially, a person would have not serve as the owner's primary residence, and they'd have a short-term rental home permit, a transient vacation rental permit, or a conditional permit allowing transient vacation rental use. But if they don't use it for those purposes and they use it as long-term rental, then they'd fall into
then they can be
residential.
Listed here as an exception with all these other things.
But at that point,
that's just what
I guess at that point, if you're doing long-term use, you'd probably want to forego having your short-term rental home permit and just have it be highest and best use be residential, which is a lower tax classification.
Right. Well, I have a neighbor who had a short-term rental, had a bed and breakfast, and then decided to lease it out long-term. I don't know how long he kept that permit, but it becomes an option, I guess, if you need it. But he's now renting out long-term a 5-bedroom house. So,
Mr. Correa, why don't you share with the members what a tenant with a long-term agreement can have benefit for?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. King, I think your question is a very good question and is one that we've considered. Right now, we have many different small bills. This bill is to just take away from the short-term rental out of commercial to go into highest and best use. Your question is addressed in the BF 45, the next bill, which accommodates the person who dedicate for residential use for long-term rentals. So there's a lot of things that came up in the previous meeting that we've incorporated in the new language in the amendments. Unfortunately, they are on different bills. So I think your question and your concern is on the next bill.
Okay, so one of the issues that came up in testimony was, do we know how many people with these short-term permits are actually renting long-term? So, are we going to cause hundreds of people to lose their rentals, or are we talking about a few people? Are we talking about 1,000 people? That's what we don't know. So, there's a lot of information we don't know. If we enact this, that could create a situation where people lose their rentals, was what I heard earlier.
We'll put in a request to see if there's information that can be received by the committee, Ms. King.
Thank you.
Regarding that concern. So I understand your request. My other side would be, what does it mean for us not to do anything? Because I can tell you, status quo is not good enough. Anything else on this item? The chair knows that we still need more discussion and more work on this proposal. So I'm not going to have we're not doing any decision on this today here. So it's time for your comments, some suggestions, and other points. Mr. Guzman?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I recall in 2014 when this this actual ordinance was amended to place the non-owner occupied TVRs and STR homes and conditional permits into the commercial rate category. And if I can recall, it was almost to the point where we didn't know what to do with them because they didn't really fit into the hotel and resort under the zoning code as explained by the planning director. They were excluded from hotel zoning. So then we have a situation where it's in conflict with our tax categories. So they were almost like looking for a rate, and they seem to advocate the commercial rate. So I recall that we did pass that. But in reality, if you read the definition of the categories in commercial rate, it's not really that consistent. So it's almost like they should have their own category in itself. And that's wherein lies the issue. Is like if we're trying to consolidate into bigger buckets, you have certain categories that don't fit into the bigger bucket. And I think these items that are what you would call spot zoning and basically areas where they're permitted to do so because of granted permits, cause these spot zoning. We've got to figure out how do we then somehow come to the agreement that there are existing categories that just don't fit in to larger buckets. And I think this is one category that doesn't. It doesn't really necessarily fit consistently within the commercial rate, and it doesn't fit in the hotel zoning, resort rate, which would be the highest and best use. So I think we have a lot to work on. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. Anything else? I'll allow every member to give comment. Ms. Cochran, anything at this time? No. Thank you. Ms. Sugimura?
So testifiers referenced that 2014, and Member Guzman just talked about it. So I guess until or when you have your next meeting, then I will study this, because it sounds like it probably answered or talked about these discrepancies, and some decision was made by council, sounds like unanimously.
No, I didn't vote for it.
Oh, well, maybe not you, but whatever it was a study that I should look at then, which directed council decision at that time.
Yeah. I think we made a bad decision. But that's my opinion. Ms. Crivello?
No comments, but I appreciate this coming before us and hope we can vet it further. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anything, Ms. King? Okay. So again, yeah, research this, because when this was first presented in the late 90s, it was always about paying hotel rates for this classification. Okay, that's how it started. Hotel. Okay, with no objections, we're going to defer this item.
No objections.
Okay, number 42 is deferred. We got one more item, 45. I think we can have some good discussion at least to start off with. Again, the key today is to get that conversation started. Again, this is another bill that the chair is proposing for consideration. Again, this is another baby step in the chair's recommendation to you regarding adjustments in real property taxation. This is under real property class. We have land and building, subheading planned developments and condominium property regimes under BF 45. We have communication 17-147. We also have August 3rd, proposed bill for an ordinance to amend 3.48.305, as well as an additional revised bill dated September 11, 2017, also from the Corporation Council regarding adjustments to the section 3.48.305. Okay, this morning I'll ask Mr. Turio first to give us comments on this. And again, from the testimony your chair has already heard, you know, I am very open. And again, we've already pre-discussed considerations of either exemptions or other components that would not hinder long-term. So we are already reviewing those components. Mr. Turio, comments, please.
Thank you, Chairman. BF 45, in a nutshell, is to repeal the Condo Code 348-305C, still allowing for the grandfathering use of commercialized residential prior to those who had approval prior to May 23rd, 2012, adding in the consideration for the council members that had a issue regarding long-term rental in 348-370 is the add for the condominium units or planned developments dedicated for long-term residential use, which allow for an owner to dedicate for a period of 10 years from the long-term use, provided that no dedication on vacant land. Those parcels who dedicate shall be classified as apartment as outlined in 348-370B. It to be recorded with the Bureau of Conveyances. I'm just going down, members, in 370. The director shall review the petition. In E, it basically talks about the renewal periods of 10 years. In F, there is a violation similar to any other dedication that you'll pay back all the savings plus penalty. That is very similar language throughout the code. And just so that there is intent that's followed through. I guess that's the reason for the penalty provision. In H, it just talks about it shall be filed by September 1st for a decision by December 15th. And basically, that is the code as proposed. And I understand And I don't think we have any position whether or not it'll be a dedication or exemption or whatever it is. The whole point behind here is to streamline the code to have one way of classifying land. And there are some provisions that grandfather some people, and it allows for some exceptions as discussed in previous meetings, Chairman. So that's what I have for initial pass. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I'll ask Mr. Spence, do you have anything you want to share at this point in time?
Thank you, Chairman. Now this seems, I know there are a number of condominium projects, particularly in South and West Maui, that allow short-term, either by their zoning or they fall under, they were grandfathered in as an entire project when short-term was allowed. This seems to be a good thing that people can dedicate their property for long-term residential, their particular unit, and receive some benefit from that.
Okay, thank you.
And I have not looked, and I should say that's an initial impression. I have not looked at this in any kind of detail.
Okay. Well, thank you for your cursory comments. Mr. Uyoka, any comments at this time?
No comments, Chair. Available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Crivello, any questions at this time on for this round?
Thank you, Chair. Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. King, do you have any questions at this time?
Thank you, Chair. So under 3.48.370, the title says condominium units or planned developments dedicated for long-term use. So this is ones that are already dedicated for long-term use, or is this ones that want to be dedicated for long-term use?
Department?
Thank you, Chairman. This is an add to the language to become a program that would allow you to dedicate. This does not exist currently.
Right. No, I understand that. But what you're saying is this section is for condominium units or planned developments that would want to be dedicated for long-term, not all that are already dedicated for long-term residential use.
That is correct. That is an option for them.
That might need to be described in the title, because then you go through the whole process of becoming dedicated. So that was my confusion, is I thought, well, if they're already dedicated, why do they have to go through this? But basically what you're saying is you're allowing a process for them to become dedicated and then presumable tax benefit from this. That's what this section is.
That's the chair's intent, Ms. King.
Okay, so the intent is that if people are going to dedicate their condo or their property to long-term residential rental, then they should get a tax relief. And is there a kind of a range of what we're looking at?
Mr. Uyoka.
Thank you, Chair. Let me back it up a little bit for you, Ms. King. Currently, Section C, 348-305C, basically it says for condos, you're taxed at actual use. All other parcels on Maui are taxed at highest and best use. So the proposal was to delete the actual use and everybody just be taxed at highest and best use. The concern was there are certain condos which are zoned hotel, resort, or other things. And the concern was they might be currently doing long-term residential use, but because they'll be taxed at the potentially higher, highest and best use, I believe Mr. White brought up the concern, and he wanted us to put something in to allow for those long-term residential uses, which were actual uses, to be preserved. Looking at it various ways, exemptions were discussed. We weren't sure on enforcement and other matters. So we looked at a dedication. So if you're to dedicate the property, it's your option. You can choose to dedicate. And it states that you'll be in the apartment classification, which currently is lower than hotel and resort. But again, the rates vary year to year with the annual budget ordinance. So currently it is tax relief, but I can't guarantee that moving forward because that's this body's decision.
Right. So currently, what's the differential between hotel and resort and apartments? I don't have that right in front of me. Mr. Drew?
$3.05.
Okay. So that would be the incentive for someone going through this procedure. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. Ms. Cochran, any comments or questions at this time? Okay, thank you. Ms. Sugimura?
Not at this time.
Okay. Again, one of the things that you heard in the testimony was concern on the impacts on long-term rentals. Again, there's a couple of ways to approach it. You heard the term exemption, you heard the term dedications, there's multiple ways we can address it. Because there's some similarities to 42, although I was open to trying to push this out, I would going to recommend that we defer this because I think some of the questions or requests for information regarding numbers of potential units impacted and whatnot, we'll see if there is information out there. Okay, and we'll give it appropriate time. But I'm going to definitely bring this back before we hit budget because we're going to need to get some guidelines and parameters done for the new budget, which will be coming up very soon. Is there any other questions or for the chair or our resource people? Because on 45, besides the concern about the long-term impacts, is there other components of the proposal that is of concern to the members at this time?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sugimura?
So just wondering if a person, based upon your proposal or the proposal, if a person wants to have long-term rental, then they have to go through all of these steps for the tax benefit. Therefore, that's the incentive. So it wouldn't cause a person to not want to do it. But what happens if they don't leave it in there for 10 years? Then what would happen what is the impact for that?
Gentlemen?
Thank you, Chair. Similar to the ag dedication, you get rolled back. Basically, if you end before the agreed upon period, you pay the difference in taxes, and I believe there's a penalty. I'm not sure for the difference all the way up to whenever you left. Again, the dedication period, it's in the bill. It doesn't have to be 10 years. That's a policy issue of this body. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so two things before we finish up this item, members. I'm going to ask you that we did receive August 25, 2017 from Department of Finance a response to this committee's requests on this item. So please review that response dated August 25. Also in your binder or part of your Granicus files, you should have already within your ability to access. This was presented on, let's see, by Dr. Lawrence Boyd. It's under the heading of Maui Housing, Supply, Demand, Property Taxes, and Affordability. This is under PAF 16-017. He has written his comments and his review regarding housing supply, demand, how he perceives the problem, and a few other things, including under property taxation. So please review that before we bring this back for further review, members. It may assist you in your deliberations. Yes, Ms. Cochran.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just kind of wanted maybe get the reasoning behind the condominium property regimes and what that was created for or why, and if I can just get a background clarification on that
okay.
type of
Thank you for that request.
development.
Mr. Uoka, if you have comments, if you could share some with in response to Ms. Cochran's.
If I can get a clarification, you mean why CPRs were invented, or
Yeah,
why they
basically
have?
I mean, what was the point, what was the purpose for creating this type of, use of land?
I guess.
Mr. Uoka?
Do you mean in general, like why CPRs are allowed, or do you mean for taxation, why they're taxed for actual use?
I mean,
Or both.
is it because they get a sort of better deal with taxation purposes? Is it because it expedites,
okay.
permitting for certain developments, or what was it created for, and the main purpose for CPRs?
I believe it's just a different property regime, different way to hold property and to, I don't want to say subdivide because it's not a subdivision of land, but it's separate ownership regimes. I'm not an expert on it, but I can tell you for tax purposes, I think from the beginning of the tax code, condos were, at least since Maui adopted it, CPRs were always taxed at actual use, not highest and best use. That was just language that was in there. I believe other counties have moved away from that. But as far as there are advantages and disadvantages, I'm sure, of having a CPR versus a subdivision. But as far as why they exist, I don't know the history of it. Thank you.
Mr. Terry, any comments you may have on this query from Ms. Cochran? From assessors or real
From an
property
assessor's standpoint, having the CPRs and the actual use is just a lot of labor for our office. That's probably a lot of the 22,000 pieces of paper coming in a year. By moving this out, it streamlines our operations by far. It allows our clerks to do other forms of work that they can do. So for our standpoint, and the reason why we brought this forward is, one, it brings uniformity to the code as to trying to classify properties all one way, similar to the Big Island, similar to Kauai. Number two, from an operational standpoint, it gives our clerical staff a lot of relief in not requesting and sending these paper out and receiving these paper annually. It also reduces the need to have all those AOAOs report annually to us. Reality, you're not going to get 100% compliance in this area anyway. But it is going to be a way to be a lot easier to enforce based on how we're doing things for all other properties. So the other 2/3 of the property, we're doing it one way, and we don't have a problem with doing that way. And we're just trying to find a way to do it one way. And that is the reason why we brought it forward.
Mr. Spence, any comments on property regimes or horizontal regimes?
Not really, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I understand the controversy with condos on like agricultural land and stuff like that, but as far as condominium buildings, that's just it's a form of ownership. Some people prefer to live in a multifamily setting without a yard to take care of, and somebody else is taking care of the swimming pool, and they like living close to the neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. It's just it's an option for owning property is all.
Ms. Cochran?
No, I appreciate all the mana'o from the different departments here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anything else, members? Yes, Ms. Kane.
Yes, I was just wondering, I mean, I hear references to Kauai and the Big Island and how it's working better for them to streamline. Is it possible to get, somebody from those tax offices here to tell us how and why it's working better, or is it working better for them than the way that we have it currently? I mean, we kind of did that when we looked at the golf course maintenance. We brought people in from the other islands to talk about, how they streamline their maintenance. So just wanted to throw that out there as
I'll take that under advisement,
Okay.
Ms. King. But the good point is, but the point that I'm glad you recognize is what we're proposing is not unique to us. Our sister counties have either reviewed it, adopted it, made the revisions, or are open to doing what we're doing.
Right.
So, we're not doing anything.
So it might be helpful just to hear from them as to how, before, what it was like before they did this move, and then how it helps them now.
Yeah.
Just a
But I would say
suggestion.
at this point in time, we're the more aggressive in trying to bring it into a new simplified format. I think we're leading the charge in that area. But I'll put out the request.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Sure. Anything else, members? If not, with no objections, we're going to defer item 45, members.
Objections.
Okay, this item is deferred. I thank you for participating in the discussions and providing the questions and concerns of the various agenda items. We're done for today, and we'll bring this back when we are ready. Okay? This meeting is adjourned.